Alright, settle in, folks, because you are not going to believe this one. If you thought you'd heard every HOA horror story, trust me, this one takes the cake, eats it, and then tries to fine you for improper cake disposal. So, grab your popcorn, maybe a drink, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because this ride gets wild. It all started when I bought my slice of heaven. Or, well, what I thought was going to be my slice of heaven. After years of a pretty demanding, shall we say, structured career, more on that later, maybe, I was ready for peace, quiet, acres of it. And I found this place, a sprawling ranch, a good ways out of town, with enough land that my nearest neighbor was more of a distant rumor than an actual person I'd have to interact with. The crown jewel of this property, for me anyway, was a sizable pond. Not a lake, mind you, but a big, beautiful, natural-looking pond. Perfect for reflecting on life, maybe some fishing, just existing. Now, here's the kicker, and it's important. My ranch was bordered on one side by one of those newer, meticulously planned communities. You know the type. Perfect lawns, houses that all looked like they were printed from the same catalog, and, of course, a homeowners association with rules thicker than a phone book for a city you don't live in. My property, let me be crystal clear, was not part of this HOA. Never had been, never would be. My deed was clear. My fences were clear. My desire to be left alone was, I thought, pretty clear too. I'd been there maybe a month, just starting to get the lay of the land, figuring out where the best spot for my morning coffee was, when I first encountered her. Let's call her Brenda. Brenda of the HOA. I saw her from a distance at first. She was power walking along the perimeter of the HOA, right where their perfectly manicured grass met my slightly wilder fence line. She had the haircut. You know the one. The I need to speak to your manager, and then their manager, and then the regional director special. Short, spiky in a way that defied gravity and reason, and usually a shade of blonde that doesn't occur in nature. She always seemed to be wearing expensive athletic wear, despite the only marathon she appeared to be running being one of neighborhood surveillance. Often, she clutched a clipboard. A clipboard, like she was conducting an audit of the birdsong or something. I didn't pay her much mind initially. Just a neighbor, I figured. A slightly intense neighbor, but whatever. Live and let live, right? That was my motto. Apparently, Brenda's motto was live, and let me tell you how to live, and also that thing you're doing is wrong. The first direct interaction was a note, tucked into my mailbox, which was a good quarter-mile trek for her from her side of the fence. The note, penned in that passive-aggressive cursive that only certain people can master, was an official notice from the Willow Creek Estates Beautification Committee, which I suspected was just Brenda and her clipboard. It said, and I quote, "Dear resident of adjacent property. Couldn't even be bothered to find out my name. It has come to our attention that the large body of water on your land, henceforth referred to as the West Pond, is in a state of concerning disarray. The overgrowth of reeds and the general lack of manicured shoreline are negatively impacting the aesthetic harmony and potential property values of Willow Creek Estates. We trust you will take immediate steps to rectify this situation. A follow-up inspection will be conducted." I actually laughed. West Pond? Did she name it herself? Rectify what? My beautiful natural pond? I crumpled it up and tossed it. Big mistake. Huge. It was like I'd ignored a royal decree. What do you all think? Was I too dismissive? Should I have sent her back a drawing of a platypus giving her the thumbs down? Let me know your most creative initial response in the comments. A few days later, I was out near my pond, just enjoying the evening air, and there she was, Brenda, standing on her side of the fence, arms crossed, visor casting a long shadow over her already grim expression. She didn't wave. She just stared. Then, she shouted, her voice carrying unervingly well across the distance. "Excuse me, mister." I pretended I couldn't hear her at first. Maybe she'd just go away. No such luck. "You, with the pond." I sighed, a deep, weary sigh that came from the depths of my soul, where my hopes for a quiet retirement were rapidly being eroded. I ambled closer to the fence line, not crossing onto HOA land. Mind you, I'm a stickler for property lines. Unlike some people. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral, polite even. You received our notice, I presume? She said, her voice dripping with the kind of condescension that could curdle milk. The one about my pond? I replied. Yeah, I got it. Look, ma'am. Brenda Macmillan. I'm the head of the Beautification Committee and vice chair of the Architectural Review Board. She puffed out her chest slightly. Like that meant anything to me, a guy standing on his own land next to his own pond. Okay, Brenda, I said. With all due respect, this is my private property. My pond. It's not part of Willow Creek Estates. It's not subject to your HOA rules or your, beautification efforts. Her eyes narrowed. The runoff, mister? She didn't know my name yet, and it seemed to infuriate her. The runoff from that thing could affect our community drainage. And the mosquitoes. It's clearly a breeding ground. It's a hazard. It's a natural pond, Brenda, I explained, trying to channel the patience of a saint. It's been here a lot longer than your development. It has a healthy ecosystem. The frogs eat the mosquitoes. I didn't add that her perfectly manicured lawns probably used more pesticides than my entire ranch. We have standards here, she sniffed, gesturing vaguely towards the step-4 desk houses behind her. That pond is an eyesore, and frankly, we're concerned about unauthorized access. Children could wander over. It needs to be fenced properly and signed. What if someone drowns? It is fenced, I said, pointing to my perfectly adequate, if not HOA-approved fortress-style fence. My property line is fenced, and it's private property. If children from your community are wandering onto private land, then that's a supervision issue for their parents, not a landscaping issue for me. Oh, she did not like that. Her face went a sort of mottled red. This is unacceptable. There are bylaws. There are local ordinances about unmaintained water features, which don't apply to me or my agricultural zoned land, I said, my patience wearing thin. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have actual work to do. Have a nice evening. I turned and walked away. I heard her sputter behind me, something about, you haven't heard the last of this? And, I'll be contacting the authorities. Standard Karen battle cries. I figured that was just bluster. Just an overly zealous HOA busybody with too much time on her hands. Boy, was I wrong. This wasn't just an opening skirmish. This was Brenda declaring war on my pond. And by extension, on me. And little did she know, you really don't want to pick a fight involving my pond. You see, my pond had a bit of a secret. A secret Brenda was about to stumble into like a bull in a china shop. A very sensitive china shop. The notes started appearing more frequently after that. Not just in the mailbox, but sometimes tied to my fence, flapping in the breeze like little flags of her disapproval. They were masterpieces of passive aggression, filled with HOA jargon that, again, had absolutely zero jurisdiction over me. Notice of noncompliance, vegetation height, warning, unregulated aquatic ecosystem. My personal favorite was potential violation. Unattractive watercoloration. What did she want? For me to die at HOA-approved beige. I started a file. A Brenda file. Every note, every sighting. I installed a couple of discreet trail cams after she started getting bolder. Peering through my fence with binoculars. Yes, actual binoculars. It all went into the file. My wife, Sarah, thought it was hilarious at first. She has a clipboard, Dave? Seriously. Sarah would chuckle, reading over the latest Brendagram. What's she going to do? Fine you with imaginary HOA bucks? It's not funny, Sarah. I'd grumble, though a small part of me did see the absurdity. She's relentless, and she genuinely believes she's in the right. People like that usually do, Sarah said, suddenly more serious. They can't comprehend a world that doesn't bend to their specific set of rules. Just be careful. Don't let her bait you into actually violating some obscure county code she digs up. Sarah was right, of course. I made sure all my I's were dotted and T's were crossed regarding my property. Agricultural zoning was pretty lenient, thankfully. The pond was natural, spring-fed, and had been on county maps for over a century. There were no specific regulations I was flouting by letting it exist. Brenda, however, was not to be deterred by facts or property lines. Her surveillance escalated. I'd see her, or sometimes one of her HOA cronies. She was clearly trying to recruit a posse, lurking near the fence line. They'd take pictures, with their phones, like they were documenting a crime scene, the crime of nature existing too close to their beige paradise. One afternoon, my trail cam caught her actually reaching over the fence with a long pole that had a little net on the end, trying to scoop out some algae or a lily pad. Trespassing clear as day. The video was grainy, but it was unmistakably Brenda, her visor askew, engaged in her unauthorized pond tending. I saved that video with a special little star next to it in the Brenda file. Then came the emails. She must have done some digging or sweet-talked someone at the county records office, because suddenly my inbox was also under siege. These were even more formal, citing non-existent intercommunity agreements and regional watershed management protocols that sounded impressive but were pure fiction. She CC'd the entire HOA board on these emails. I could just imagine their weary sighs every time a new Brenda's Pond Crusade update landed in their inboxes. I responded to the first one, politely but firmly reiterating that my property was not under her HOA's jurisdiction and kindly requesting she cease her harassment. Her reply was basically, "Nah, the pond is a problem and I'm the problem solver." After that, I just started filtering her emails directly into the Brenda file. What would you have done? Kept responding? Sent her a glitter bomb? The patience I was cultivating was truly next level. The real escalation, the moment I knew this was moving beyond simple, albeit extreme, neighborly annoyance, was when I started noticing other activity. Not Brenda's. This was different. Official-looking vehicles, not police but county types, would occasionally drive slowly past my main gate. Once, a guy in a truck with some kind of environmental services logo actually stopped and peered through my gate for a few minutes before driving off. I had a suspicion Brenda was making calls, complaining to anyone who would listen: county planning, code enforcement, probably the dog catcher just in case my pond was harboring unlicensed squirrels. Each time I assumed they'd look up my property, see it was all above board, and tell her to take a hike. But she was persistent. That was Brenda's superpower. Sheer, unadulterated, irrational persistence. Around this time, the other uses for my pond were becoming a little more frequent. Nothing major, mind you, just low-key stuff. Scheduled, approved, all very quiet. But if you were, say, a nosy neighbor with binoculars and an overactive imagination, you might see things you didn't understand. A couple of guys in wetsuits doing equipment checks. A small, unmarked van parked near the access road for a few hours. The occasional odd noise that wasn't your usual rural symphony of crickets and coyotes. To Brenda, these were not signs of routine, authorized activities. Oh no. To Brenda, these were clues. Evidence that the West Pond, she was still calling it that in her increasingly frantic communications, was not just an eyesore, but a hotbed of something. Something sinister. Something that definitely violated paragraph 7, subsection B, addendum 4 of the Willow Creek Estates Guide to Acceptable Shrubbery. Then came the day of the first official visit. I was mending a fence on the far side of my property when I saw the cruiser pull up to my main gate. 2 sheriff's deputies. My heart sank a little, not because I'd done anything wrong, but because this was exactly the kind of escalation I'd been dreading. Brenda had finally managed to get someone with a badge to pay attention. I drove my ATV back to the gate. The deputies were polite, professional. "Afternoon, sir. We had a call about some unusual activity on this property, and some concerns about an unregulated body of water." I sighed. "Let me guess. The call came from a Brenda McMillan over at Willow Creek Estates." The senior deputy, a guy with a weathered face and tired eyes that had seen it all, actually cracked a small smile. "She's a frequent flyer, let's say, but we still have to check it out. Something about unpermitted structures and possible soil contamination near a large pond." "My pond," I said, trying to keep the exasperation out of my voice, "which is natural on my private agricultural land and perfectly fine. The only unpermitted structure is probably the one she's imagining in her head. Would you like to see it?" The pond, I mean, not the inside of her head. I don't think any of us want to see that. The deputies exchanged a look. If you don't mind, sir, just to say we looked. So, I opened the gate and led them down the track to the pond. It was a beautiful day. The water was clear, dragonflies were zipping around. A couple of ducks paddled serenely in the middle. It looked about as threatening as a basket of puppies. This is it, I said. The source of all the neighborhood terror. The deputies looked around. One of them kicked at the dirt by the edge. Looks like a pond to me, Bill, he said to his partner. Bill nodded. Sure does, Frank. No secret submarine pens. No bubbling vats of toxic waste. I saw movement over by the HOA fence line. Brenda, trying to be subtle, but failing spectacularly, half hidden behind a perfectly conical shrub, binoculars practically glued to her face. She was practically vibrating with anticipation. I think she genuinely expected them to slap cuffs on me and drain the pond on the spot. All right, sir, Deputy Bill said to me. Looks like a false alarm. Sorry to have bothered you. No problem, officers, I said. Just wish your frequent flyer would find a new hobby. You and half the county, Deputy Frank muttered as they walked back to their cruiser. As they drove away, I looked over at Brenda. Her shoulders slumped, her triumphant stance deflated. But then her head snapped up, and she glared at me. A look of pure, unadulterated fury. This wasn't over. This was just an intermission for her. If anything, the police visit, even though it resulted in nothing, probably emboldened her. She'd gotten their attention. She just needed a bigger complaint. Now, here's where the hidden strength or critical information part of the story really starts to come into play. As you YouTube storytellers like to say, you see my structured career before I bought the ranch? Yeah, that was 25 years in the military. Special operations, to be specific. And while I was retired, I still had connections. And my pond, due to its size, depth, and relative seclusion, was occasionally used with my full permission and all necessary agreements in place as a discreet training site for certain specialized units from a nearby base. It was all very low impact, very hush-hush. Equipment familiarization, underwater navigation exercises, that sort of thing. Nothing that involved explosions or, simulated amphibious assaults that would alarm the neighborhood. Most of the time, you wouldn't even know they were there. It was one of the reasons I'd bought this specific property. I was happy to offer it up for these quiet uses. Felt like still contributing in a small way. The local sheriff's department was peripherally aware, in a need-to-know kind of way, that my property sometimes hosted official training. They didn't know specifics, nor did they need to. It was just a heads up so that if some hiker stumbled across something odd, it wouldn't cause a panic. Brenda, of course, knew none of this. To her, any activity that wasn't lawn mowing or synchronized bird feeding was deeply suspicious. And after the deputies left without arresting me or condemning my pond, her frustration seemed to curdle into a new level of obsession. She was convinced I was hiding something, that the pond was a front. For what, I have no idea. A secret koi smuggling ring? An unlicensed tadpole farm? An alien landing site? With Brenda, all bets were off. Who knows what was brewing in that overchlorinated brain of hers? Drop your wildest guess in the comments. What do you think Brenda suspected was going on at my secret lake? Funniest answer gets a heart. The next phase of her campaign was to try and gather evidence. Her furtive picture-taking from her side of the fence became more brazen. I'd see her, out there with her phone, sometimes even a small digital camera, angling for shots. The trail cams were getting in workout. One particularly amusing series of photos showed her trying to climb a small stepladder she'd dragged to the fence line, nearly toppling over into a patch of perfectly HOA manicured but surprisingly prickly roses on her own side. Schadenfreude, thy name is Brenda in a rosebush. Then she made her biggest mistake yet. She trespassed. Properly. Not just reaching over the fence, but actually finding a spot where the brush was thick and my fencing a little older, and squeezing through. My cameras caught it all. There she was, bold as brass, marching onto my land, heading for the pond, phone held aloft like she was documenting Bigfoot. She didn't get far. The area around the pond, while natural, isn't exactly a paved walkway. She tripped over a root, went sprawling, and her phone flew out of her hand, landing with a soft plop right at the water's edge. The footage of her scrambling in the mud, trying to retrieve it without actually touching the contaminated water, was pure gold. She eventually fished it out, covered in muck, and beat a hasty, muddy retreat back through the fence. I saved those images and videos to a very special folder within the Brenda file, labeled Exhibit A. I didn't do anything with it immediately. Why would I? She was doing a fine job of self-destructing. My plan, if you could call it that, was to simply let Brenda be Brenda. Let her continue to make a fool of herself. Let her dig her hole deeper and deeper. I did, however, take one precaution. I had a quiet chat with my contact at the base, a Major Thompson. I explained I had an overly zealous neighbor who was becoming a bit of a nuisance, specifically fixated on the pond. I mentioned her trespassing and her attempts to photograph the area. Major Thompson was a no-nonsense guy. Is she interfering with any scheduled activities? Dave? Not yet, I said, but her interest is escalating. I'm concerned she might eventually blunder into something she really shouldn't see, or worse, try to report some routine training exercise as something nefarious and cause a bigger headache for everyone. Understood, he said. We'll keep our profile extra low on your property for a bit. And if she does escalate, let me know immediately. We have protocols for civilian interference, especially if it jeopardizes operational security, even for training. That was reassuring. I also took the time to put up a few more, very clear, private property no trespassing of violators will be prosecuted signs, specifically angled towards the Willow Creek Estates fence line. Not that I expected Brenda to pay them any heed. Rules were for other people, remember? Brenda's brief, muddy foray onto my land seemed to have only strengthened her resolve. Her phone, once cleaned, probably held images that, in her mind, were damning. A bit of disturbed earth where some equipment might have been placed temporarily. An odd ripple on the water. Who knew what she thought she'd captured? Her confidence was now through the roof. She'd faced down the local deputies, in her mind. They were clearly just too incompetent to see the truth she saw. She'd gathered her own intelligence. She was, in her world, Erin Brockovich, if Erin Brockovich was obsessed with imaginary pond monsters and HOA compliance. The build-up to the final confrontation was, in retrospect, almost cinematic. There was a very discreet training exercise scheduled. So low-key, it was practically invisible. A couple of divers were doing some underwater equipment calibration in the deepest part of the pond. They were in and out in a couple of hours. No noise, no fuss. They used an old, unmarked service road that was well hidden from the HOA side. But Brenda had her spidey sense tingling. Or, more likely, she'd been maintaining a constant vigil. She must have seen a vehicle or a flicker of movement, something that her overactive imagination inflated into a full-blown conspiracy. Because that afternoon, the sirens came. Not just one cruiser this time, two, and then a third. They weren't using the main gate this time. Someone, Brenda, undoubtedly, had directed them to a spot along the fence line closer to the pond, claiming there was an emergency situation in progress. I was in my workshop when I heard them. My stomach clenched. This was it. This was her big play. I headed towards the pond, my heart rate a little higher than I liked. As I got closer, I saw the flashing lights reflecting off the trees. I saw the deputies, looking confused and annoyed. And I saw Brenda. Oh, glorious Brenda. She was standing on my side of the fence this time. She'd actually climbed over it, or found her previous weak spot, and was standing there, arms waving, pointing at the pond with the dramatic flair of a Shakespearean actor in their death throes. Several other HOA residents, her reluctant posse, were hovering on their side of the fence, looking deeply uncomfortable but clearly dragged there as witnesses. There! Brenda shrieked as I approached. He's here. The owner. He's in on it. A sergeant I vaguely recognized from the previous visit stepped forward. Sir, we've had a report of, well, frankly, a lot of things. Illegal construction, hazardous materials, Unauthorized personnel on your property conducting potentially dangerous activities near this lake. She'd upgraded it to a lake in her frantic call. Apparently. It's a pond, Sergeant, I said, my voice dangerously calm. And the only unauthorized person on my property right now, as far as I can see, is that woman. I pointed directly at Brenda. Who is trespassing? Again. Brenda gasped, clutching her chest. I am a concerned citizen. I have photographic evidence. There are men, in strange outfits, doing things. In that water. They're building something. It's a threat to our community, our children, our property values. Her voice was cracking. She was hitting all her favorite talking points. Before the sergeant could respond, another vehicle pulled up the track, this one a dark, official-looking SUV. It wasn't a sheriff's vehicle. The doors opened, and out stepped Major Thompson in uniform, accompanied by another officer I didn't recognize, also in uniform, looking very serious. Brenda's eyes went wide. She probably thought these were the higher-ups she'd been demanding, coming to finally validate her crusade. Oh, you sweet, misguided summer child. Major Thompson ignored Brenda completely. He walked over to the sergeant, showed some identification, and they had a brief, quiet conversation. The sergeant's eyebrows shot up. He nodded, then turned to his deputies. Okay, folks, Major Thompson said, his voice not loud but carrying an undeniable weight of authority that cut through Brenda's residual sputtering. He addressed the deputies first, then slowly panned his gaze to include Brenda, who was now looking a little less triumphant and a little more green. This property, Major Thompson began, his tone crisp and official, including the body of water you refer to as a pond or lake, is periodically utilized by United States military personnel for authorized training exercises. These activities are sanctioned, scheduled, and conducted under strict safety and security protocols. Brenda's jaw, which had been flapping, snapped shut with an almost audible click. The color was draining from her face so fast she was starting to blend in with the beige houses in the distance. The men in strange outfits that Mrs. McMillan reported, Major Thompson continued with a slight, almost imperceptible emphasis on her name that made me want to cheer, were highly trained members of the armed forces engaged in routine maneuvers. The things they were doing are classified. The structures she believes are being built do not exist, beyond temporary training aids that are removed upon completion of exercises. He paused, letting that sink in. The silence was thick. Even the crickets seemed to be holding their breath. Brenda looked like she'd been slapped with a wet fish. A very large, very official, government-issued fish. Your repeated calls to emergency services, Mrs. McMillan, Major Thompson said, his eyes now fixed on her, cold and hard as granite, based on unsubstantiated claims and frankly, fantasy, have diverted significant law enforcement resources. Furthermore, your unauthorized presence on this private property, especially during designated training periods, constitutes a serious security concern. Your attempts to photograph and document these activities could, under certain circumstances, be interpreted as interference with military operations. Interference with military operations. You could see the words hit Brenda like a physical blow. Her posse behind the fence looked like they wanted the earth to swallow them whole. One of them actually took a step back, then another trying to discreetly disassociate. But, the bylaws, Brenda stammered, her voice a mere squeak. The aesthetic, the runoff, the danger. I have pictures. She fumbled for her phone, the one she'd nearly lost in the mud. Your pictures, Mrs. McMillan, the major said, his voice utterly devoid of warmth, will likely show nothing more than authorized personnel on private property where they have every right to be. Property where you do not have the right to be. The sergeant stepped forward again. Ma'am, he said to Brenda, his voice firm but weary, you are trespassing on private property. You have made multiple unsubstantiated reports to law enforcement. You are now being advised that your actions are bordering on interference with official military activities. I suggest you return to your property immediately. Brenda looked from the sergeant to Major Thompson, then to me. Her face was a kaleidoscope of emotions. Disbelief, rage, dawning horror, and then, finally, a sort of pathetic deflation. The fight just went out of her. She looked small, ridiculous, standing there in her expensive activewear, now smudged with dirt from climbing the fence, her clipboard of righteousness completely forgotten somewhere. "But she whispered. "Now, ma'am," the sergeant repeated, with a tone that brooked no further argument. Slowly, like a robot whose batteries were dying, Brenda turned. She didn't even try to find her previous gap in the fence. She walked to the nearest post and awkwardly, ungracefully, scrambled back over to the HOA side, nearly falling on her backside. Her fan club had already dispersed, melting back towards their perfect homes, probably hoping to avoid being implicated by association. Major Thompson gave a curt nod to the sergeant. "Thank you for your assistance, Sergeant. We'll handle the official follow-up regarding the security implications." He then looked at me. "Dave, I think this might be the end of your neighborly disputes regarding the pond." "One can only hope, Major," I said, a wave of relief washing over me. "Thank you for coming out. Part of the service," he said with a thin smile. "We don't like our training areas becoming local tourist attractions, especially not for the tinfoil hat brigade." The deputies dispersed, the major and his colleague left, and suddenly it was quiet again. Just me, my pond, and the lingering echo of Brenda's spectacular self-immolation. I walked over to the fence line. No sign of Brenda. It was like she'd evaporated, or maybe spontaneously combusted from sheer humiliation. What do you think was going through Brenda's head at that moment? Was it, "Oops, I accidentally messed with national security"? Or, "My clipboard failed me"? Seriously, let me know. I need a good laugh after all that. And hey, if you're enjoying this tale of HOA karma, do me a favor and hit that like button. Let's see if we can get this video trending. The fallout was, as you might imagine, swift and immensely satisfying. Within days, a very formal, very serious-looking letter on official government letterhead arrived at the Willow Creek Estates HOA office. I never saw it myself, but rumor has it, and small-town gossip travels fast, even from behind HOA gates, that it outlined, in no uncertain terms, the legal ramifications of civilian interference with military training activities, the seriousness of trespassing on secured private property adjacent to such zones, and strongly advised the HOA to ensure its residents understood these boundaries. It apparently hinted at potential federal involvement if any further incidents occurred. Brenda was, to put it mildly, toast. The HOA board, which had probably been tolerating her antics with a mixture of fear and exasperation, suddenly found their backbone when faced with the prospect of actual legal trouble from entities far more powerful than a disgruntled homeowner. There was an emergency board meeting. Brenda was reportedly raked over the coals. Stripped of her beautification committee leadership, her architectural review board vice-chairmanship, and any other pretend power she'd accumulated. She was, in essence, declawed and defanged. The police department also sent her a formal written warning regarding the misuse of emergency services and filing false reports. One more unsubstantiated, hysterical call from her address, and she'd be facing fines, or worse. For my part, peace descended upon my ranch like a gentle fog. The pond, my beautiful, now slightly infamous pond, was left to its natural devices and its occasional, discreet, special guests. The major called a week later to check in. "Any more civilian reconnaissance missions, Dave?" he asked, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Not a peep, Major," I replied. "I think the message was received loud and clear. It's so quiet. I can actually hear the frogs again." "Good," he said. "Glad we could clear that up. Some people just need to be reminded that the world is bigger than their cul-de-sac." The HOA went into full lockdown mode regarding anything to do with my property. If before they were cautiously avoiding the topic of Brenda's crusade, now my ranch was Voldemort, he who must not be named or looked at too closely. Some of the other residents, the ones who had clearly been roped into Brenda's posse against their better judgment, would give me these quick, apologetic little nods if they saw me from a distance. No one lingered by the fence anymore. The binocular sales in the area probably plummeted. My vindication was complete. I hadn't had to resort to lawyers or angry confrontations, or even release my exhibit, a mud-crawling video of Brenda. Though believe me, the temptation was there. Brenda, in her arrogance and her absolute conviction that she was the ultimate authority on everything within her line of sight, had engineered her own spectacular downfall. She'd poked the bear, and it turned out the bear had friends in high places. Very high, uniformed places. It was a classic case of an antagonist so blinded by her own self-importance that she couldn't see the cliff she was marching towards. And when she finally went over, she only had herself to blame. The best part was, my pond was now officially the coolest, most mysterious pond in the county. Not because of anything I did, but because of the ridiculous lengths Brenda went to misunderstand it. Life settled into a new, improved normal. The peace and quiet I'd sought when I bought the ranch finally materialized, albeit after a rather dramatic detour. Sarah and I would often sit by the pond in the evenings, and sometimes she'd just shake her head and laugh. "Remember the West Pond?" she'd say. "And the unattractive water coloration?" I'd add. I still can't believe she called the cops because she thought it was a secret lake used for. What did she even think it was for? Who knows? I'd say watching the sunset paint the water in hues Brenda would definitely have found. But I bet wherever she is, she's measuring the height of her neighbor's grass with a micrometer. And that's the thing about people like Brenda. Their need to control, to impose their narrow worldview on everyone else, it's a bottomless pit. If it's not a pond, it's the color of your mailbox, or the type of flowers you plant, or the way you breathe too loudly in your own backyard. They will always find something. The key, I learned, is documentation, patience, and sometimes just letting them run headfirst into a brick wall of reality they didn't even see coming. In this case, that brick wall was wearing combat boots. The moral of the story? Well, there are a few, I suppose. Karma can be a real kicker, especially when it arrives in a government-issue SUV. Mind your own business is always good advice. And never, ever underestimate the quiet guy with the peaceful-looking pond. It might just have a few secrets you're not prepared to deal with. Also, always check if your dangerous secret lake is actually a training ground for people who could, very politely, make your life exceedingly difficult if you annoy them enough. As for Brenda, the last I heard, she'd become significantly less vocal in HOA meetings. Someone mentioned she'd taken up competitive bird watching, but was struggling with the fact that the birds didn't follow any prescribed flight paths or color schemes. Another rumor suggested she was considering moving to a community with even stricter rules, possibly one located inside a hermetically sealed biodome. I can't confirm those, but a man can dream, can't he? I did, for a brief moment, consider putting up a small, discreet sign near the pond, visible only with high-powered binoculars from the HOA fence line. Something like, "Top secret fishing hole. Authorized personnel and ducks. Only," but Sarah talked me out of it. Said it was kicking a Karen when she was down. She was probably right. The quiet enjoyment of my property was victory enough. So there you have it. The story of how HOA Karen tried to take on my ranch pond and ended up tangling with forces far beyond her comprehension. What a ride. It just goes to show you never know what's really going on next door. Sometimes it's just a pond, and sometimes it's a pond with friends. Thanks for sticking with me through this epic saga. I hope you got a few laughs and maybe a little bit of that sweet, sweet vicarious vindication. If you've got your own HOA Karen story, I'd love to hear a snippet in the comments. Keep it brief, though. We don't want to crash the servers. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, because I've got more stories where this one came from. And give this video a thumbs up if you believe Brenda finally learned her lesson. Or hit thumbs up if you think she's currently trying to issue a citation to a cloud for improper formation. Either way, I appreciate you all being here. Until next time, stay safe, respect property lines, and maybe don't assume every body of water is a secret military installation. Unless, of course, it is. You never know.